Hey guys, tonight we're unraveling a story you've probably never thought about while fluffing your pillow. The strange, secret life of samurai fans. You know, those fluttery, graceful things you'd use to cool your soup or signal a waiter. Only these fans could stop a blade. They were used to kill, command armies, flirt, lie, and sometimes save lives. It's a tale of steel disguised as elegance, and it's probably way too much drama for this late at night. You probably won't survive this fan fight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is over there. I'm always curious how far this sleepy little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a wooded path, sandals heavy with dew, the sky folding into velvet above. In the distance, firelight flickers your lord's camp, waiting, but the weight on your shoulders isn't just armor, it's silk-bound plates, lacquered in soot black and layered like the scales of a dragon. The smell of oiled wood, sweat, and pine sap sticks to your skin, and tucked inside your sash, close to your ribs, is a fan. Just any fan. This one is forged with iron ribs, sharpened edges, and folds that could hide secrets. Orders or, in a tight squeeze, deliver a killing blow. Why do you have a fan in a world of swords? Because you're a samurai, and in your world, symbols matter, almost as much as weapons. Maybe more. In the aristocratic haze of feudal Japan, presentation was power. Your gait, your robe, even how you held your chopsticks sent signals. The fantasin was more than an accessory. It was a language, a weapon, a badge of class, and sometimes a literal lifesaver. Picture this, a battlefield not yet active. Hundreds of samurai standing in rigid silence, their armor glinting beneath the rising sun. No shouting, no chaotic scrambling, just silence. Then, with a flick of his fan, a general signals a flank movement. The motion is graceful, almost lazy, but it unleashes chaos. Historians still argue whether these fans were truly functional in combat or largely ceremonial. Some records say a samurai once blocked a katana with a folded fan. Others call that story myth-making at its finest, a warrior's bedtime boast. You decide. The samurai class emerged in the late Heian period around the 10th century and rapidly evolved from rural landowners, bodyguards, to Japan's ruling elite. They weren't just warriors, they were enforcers of order, curators of culture, and loyal or very vengeful vassals. And just like any elite, they needed tools to match both their function and their fashion. The fan entered the samurai wardrobe as a multi-tool. It didn't clatter like a sword when you entered court. It didn't need to be surrendered at a tea ceremony. And it could go anywhere, perfect for a class always on guard, always watching. But tonight, let's forget the battles for a moment. Picture yourself in a bamboo hut, fireflies pulsing outside the rice paper walls. Your armor is piled in a corner. The tesson rests beside your sleeping mat. Its iron bones are cool to the touch. You've used it to signal your men, to strike down a would-be assassin once. You've even used it to hide a love letter carefully tucked between its folds. Even sleep for a samurai was a kind of alertness, a readiness, a quiet dread. The fan, when folded, became a baton, carried by messengers, monks, nobles, and of course, soldiers. Some were simple wood and paper. Others were ironclad and engraved with family crests or poems about cherry blossoms and death. One fan might carry prayers to the gods. Another might be dipped in poison, ready to flick into an enemy's throat. In the Kamakura period, 1185-1333, samurai culture hardened under military rule. Warfare became codified. Honor, loyalty, and sacrifice became religion. Still, amidst the blood and bushido, fans kept their place, not just as signal tools on the battlefield, but as intimate companions. Imagine being a young page, barely 16, tasked with delivering a message. You ride for hours, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. When you arrive, the warlord doesn't even look up, just opens his fan, gives it a curt wave. You've just witnessed a battlefield order, or a dismissal, or worse. One of the lesser-known fan facts: the Gunzener fan, made entirely of solid iron, wasn't just a weapon. It could double as a map holder or a windscreen to keep firelight from blowing out. Multifunctional minimalism, feudal Japan style. Even Marie Kondo would be impressed. But as useful as these fans were, they were also statements. They said, I am calm, I am in control, I can command an army or hide a blade with one hand. There's something beautifully ironic about it, isn't there? That in a time when most men feared the edge of a sword, true power could be found in the flick of a fan. No shouting, no blood yet, sleepy yet, don't worry. The best is still fluttering just ahead. But for now, stay wrapped in this thought. Beneath all the armor, all the rituals and war cries, even the most feared warriors of Japan still paused to carry a fan. Sometimes it was for war, sometimes for status, and sometimes just for a little breeze under that stifling helmet, and you, lying there in bed, might feel oddly close to that world, warm under covers like a silk and steel kimono, listening for distant winds, watching firefly shadows dance across your ceiling. The night is long, traveler, and your fan is only beginning to unfold. You wake early, just before the sun yawns over the eastern ridge, mist curling low across the pine-covered hills. Your armor's been polished, rice eaten, blade sharpened. You stretch your arms and slide the katana into its place. But then, your fingers settle around something else shorter, lighter, strangely elegant. A fan, not a dainty trinket. No, this one's iron-spined and folded tightly, with lacquered paper so stiff it hums when you flick it. It's a choice, really, fan or sword, or both. And in your world, both might be equally deadly. To understand how a seemingly delicate fan held its own against the feared katana, you first have to understand how control defined a samurai's power. The sword, sharp and loud, was a last resort. A fan that was for the moments before the chaos, the tool for a commander's poise, a warrior's warning, or a subtle sign that your next breath might be your last. Let's time travel back to the Muromachi period, around the 14th century, when samurai power was at its cultural and political peak. You're walking into a provincial castle. Your blade, though gleaming, must stay at your hip, untouched. But the fan that you can open, that you can use, not just to wave away the summer heat, but to signal displeasure, or approval, or even readiness for battle. Yes, readiness. A general could command entire formations with nothing but a flick, a twist, or a subtle raise of his gunzener. War fan often crafted from solid wood or iron, with bamboo or lacquered ribs. Mounted troops would sit in silence, waiting for the high shimmer of an opened fan to release the dogs of war. Historians still debate how standardized these gestures were. Did every clan use the same signs? Or was it more like jazzy improvised internal, understood only by those in the know? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Now picture a duelto samurai locked in a personal standoff. A sword would be expected, yes, but sometimes drawing a blade inside a noble court was forbidden. That's where the tessen, the iron fan, came in. Disguised as a courtly object, it could be whipped open into a weapon in a blink. Think of it like a concealed carry-butt, feudal, stylish, and deadly when aimed at the throat. One famous tale often retold, though facts remain murky, and a high-ranking official who was ambushed at a palace gate, forbidden to carry a sword in the shogun's presence. He was seemingly defenseless, but he blocked a blow from an assassin's dagger with his folded tessen, striking back with enough force to knock the attacker unconscious. Some say he walked away without a scratch. Others claim it was all dramatized years later in kabuki plays. Either way, the message was clear. A fan could be more than just flair. But let's talk about dueling. Tessen Jitsu, the martial art of fighting with a fan, may sound like a fringe curiosity, but it was practiced with discipline and reverence. Picture this: two students, barefoot on tatami mats, circling each other. One opens his fan and spins it between his fingers, not showing off, but measuring timing, rhythm. Then a strike, swift, targeted, aimed at the pressure point near the neck. The fan isn't about brute force. It's about precision, surprise, and turning elegance into advantage. The same fan that cooled your cheek at court could shatter a nose or crush a windpipe, quieter than a sword, too. Think about that. Unlike katanas, which screamed through the air and clashed in bloody crescendo, fans were almost silent when they did their work. You could slip one out mid-conversation, hiding intent behind politeness. A twist of the wrist, and suddenly the duel is over before it starts. Historians still argue whether these fan duels were common practice or stylized legend, but documents from the Edo period suggest that high-ranking officials carried tessen not just for show, but for self-defense, especially when traveling alone or navigating tense negotiations. But let's not get too serious yet, because fans weren't all just espionage and elbow jabs. Sometimes they were pure mischief. There's a story, probably apocryphal, of a samurai who, during a diplomatic visit, became bored and decided to test his counterpart's reflexes. With no warning, he threw his folded fan like a dart across the room. It struck the other samurai's cup mid-sip, knocking it over. The room froze. Silence. Then, the other samurai calmly opened his fan, placed it in front of his face, and gave a slow nod. Point made. Duel averted. Tea ruined. The tension in such exchanges was part of the performance. Remember, samurai were raised in a culture that prized restraint. Losing control was shameful. The fan allowed for a pressure valve. A fan strike could be brushed off as a gesture, an accident, a joke. A sword, not so much. But even in formal combat, fans weren't left behind. Imagine a commander on horseback, armor clanking, perched atop a hill. Below him, rows of soldiers wait. Archers, spearmen, cavalry, all trained to watch his movements. He lifts a war fan, wide as a dinner plate, decorated with red sunbursts. With a quick flick, he snaps it closed. The cavalry charges. Some war fans were massive solid wood or iron with painted surfaces to reflect light and dazzle enemies. Others were travel-sized, built to be hidden and quick. A few were even rigged with small mechanisms, springs, blades, or poisons. It wasn't just about tradition. It was about staying alive. And don't forget, fans could be passed. In tense meetings or between scouts, a folded fan might hold a hidden note, a diagram of troop positions, even a bribe. Handing over a fan. Innocent. Handing over a map. Suspicious. Context, as always, was king. So yes, fan versus sword was a choice. Not always fair, not always balanced, but always intentional. And more than that, it was a matter of identity. The sword screamed power. The fan whispered it. As you close your eyes tonight, think about this. In a world where every gesture mattered, where honor lived and died in a single twitch of the wrist, the fan became more than a weapon. It became a mirror of the samurai soul. Hidden, graceful, deadly when it needed to be. Tomorrow, you'll learn to read the battlefield by the angle of someone's wrist. But for now, sleep. Your fan is folded. And your story is only just beginning. Your hands run over polished grain, smooth like river stones. A fan lies open before you, resting on a woven tatami mat. Not some delicate paper trinket, but a war fantassin, a balance of materials, symbolism, and precision. In the glow of the fire pit, the iron ribs gleam faintly, edges shaped into elegant threads. You tilt it, and the lacquered surface reflects your weary eyes. This isn't a thing of vanity. It's a thing of design, a folding contradiction, gentle in motion, brutal in purpose. Let's take a breath tonight and trace how this peculiar object came to be so deadly, so revered, and so oddly beautiful. To start, not all fans were equal, not even among the samurai. Class Tetesen, the Iron War fan, had variations depending on rank, region, and intent. Some were entirely made of iron, heavy, and built like miniature shields. Others disguised their steel skeleton beneath paper or silk, looking just like the decorative folding fans carried by noble ladies or poets. Deception, after all, was a kind of elegance. Joe learned this early, training under the guidance of a master craftsman. He holds up to nearly identical fans. One folds smoothly with delicate washi paper, painted with cranes. The other folds stiffly, its ribs hardened with iron. Both are balanced. Both are lethal. You'd never tell which was which until one was in your face. The process of making a tessen is part engineering, part alchemy. First, the metal ribs are forged, usually iron, though some higher-ranking samurai used steel alloy blends for better weight and strength. These ribs are tapered, not just for folding, but to control airflow when opened and to influence striking velocity when closed. Think of them as the skeleton, silent and hidden. Then comes the outer material. Many fans were coated in lacquer to resist weather, but higher-end versions used rice glue, crushed shell inlays, and even gold leaf. You could find fans embossed with family crests, moan, battle slogans, religious symbols, or intricate Fuji, sakura blossoms, or storm clouds hiding armies. Sometimes these images carried double meanings. A pine tree might mean loyalty, A crashing wave might symbolize decisive strength. Samurai symbolism was always layered, like poetry or armor. Historians have noted regional variations. Tessen from the east, especially Edo, tended to be more utilitarian. Western regions like Kyushu favored flashier designs, blending Korean and Chinese influences. Some featured edge spikes, serrated ridges, or hidden compartments. In truth, no two war fans were exactly alike. Each told a story, and then, of course, you have the gunzen and gunbai, other types of war fans. The gunzen was a folding fan used by officers in the field, sometimes wood laminate, sometimes with a reinforced iron frame. Think of it like a battle clipboard, but one that could also smack a horse to redirect it mid-art. The gunbai, on the other hand, didn't fold. It was a solid paddle-shaped fan, used by generals to signal orders, deflect arrows, and radiate pure commander energy. If you saw a gunbai being raised high on a ridge, chances were you were about to run, fight, or possibly die. And here's the quirky bit. Some samurai believed the fan's balance could influence chi flow. That's right, ancient energy. If a fan was built incorrectly, it wasn't just physically useless, it was spiritually off. That's why fans were often blessed in Shinto ceremonies. Priests would purify them with salt, fire, and ritual chants. You weren't just carrying a tool, you were carrying a talisman. Imagine sitting in a quiet fanmaker's shop. Centuries ago, outside, children play ken games. Inside, your master tests each fan by letting it fall. A perfect fan lands flat. A cursed fan always leans. That one, he whispers, pointing at the crooked one, belongs to a doomed man. Of course, some fans didn't need spiritual flaws to be dangerous. There are reports, again historians still argue whether it's true or embellished, of fans loaded with spring blade mechanisms. A flick of the wrist, and a thin poisoned needle would shoot out. The stuff of ninja stories, maybe, but some recovered fans from the late Edo period do feature tiny trigger pins and compartments. Whether used in real combat or just to show off at smoky card games, who's to say? The materials evolved as metallurgy advanced in Japan. Fan ribs became more refined. Some were wrapped in fine leather or raw silk. Others used layers of rice paper reinforced with lacquer, perfect for parrying or even creating a distracting flick in the eyes of an opponent mid-duel. It wasn't about smashing your enemy, it was about redirecting them. A fan, like a good strategy, didn't block. It guided. And yet, despite the utility, samurai didn't flaunt them. These weren't trophies. In fact, many samurai were buried, with their war fans folded, placed across their chests, not the swords, the fans, as if to say, I fought not with rage, but with rhythm. It's also important to mention how these fans bled into culture beyond the battlefield. In no theater, fans symbolized transformation. In one scene, a fan could be a sword. In the next, a mask, a scroll, a bird. The audience didn't need explanation. The object carried that much weight in their collective imagination. Even in peacetime, the materials told a tale. A tessen handed to a rival in peace talks was often inspected more than any treaty. Was it too heavy, too sharp, too new? You weren't just being handed a fan, you were being handed a message. There's something meditative about it all. This blend of form and function, of steel and story. As you hold the fan, now your hands calloused, your mind tired, you feel its balance, you sense its intent. The fan is a quiet thing, but it holds centuries, and it knows secrets you're only beginning to understand. Take one last moment here. Trace your finger along the edge of an iron rib. Feel the ridge, like a mountain path. Listen to the whisper it makes when you fold it shut. It doesn't shout. It waits, patient, purposeful. And isn't that what sleep is too? A folding, a closing, of the day's fan. So let this be your lullaby. Tonight's not sung, but folded carefully beside you. Like the war fan of an old soul long at peace. The mist rises early over the plain. You sit on your horse, its breath steaming in the morning. Chill, armor creaks with every subtle shift. No one speaks. Ahead, a sea of soldiers kneel in rows, hundreds of men with swords at their sides and bows strung taut. There is no shouting, no clanging gongs, no barking generals stomping up and down the line. Instead, on a distant hill, your commander raises one hand, in it a fan dot with a flick of his wrist. The fan opens, a simple gesture, graceful, almost casual, but the entire army moves tonight. you drift into the quiet genius of fan-based battlefield communicational art, both practical and poetic. This wasn't just some elite flair, but a deeply embedded military language built on timing, tradition, and a level of trust so precise, a misplaced flick could mean slaughter. The battlefield in feudal Japan wasn't always the chaotic mess of screaming swordsmen you might imagine. In fact, many early campaigns, especially during the Sengoku period, were exercises in order, discipline, and layered signals. Before radios, before flags, there was the gunby and the gunsman, and at the center of it all, the fan commanders needed to issue real-time commands across massive, noisy spaces. The fans served that purpose. Its visual simplicity was its strength. Raise it to signal readiness, snap it shut to trigger cavalry, point it left to send archers, point it down and your troops dig in. But what really made it work was training. Soldiers learned to read fans from day one, drill after drill, season after season, watching for movement, posture, timing. If your commander paused too long mid, you held your breath. If you flicked too fast, you moved like lightning. Historians still argue whether these gestures followed a nationwide code or if every clan created its own shorthand, like a military dialect. Some think patterns were passed down like family recipes. Others believe they were as personalized as a painter's brushstroke. Now imagine standing in the second row of a formation. Arrow nocked, the hum of tension in your shoulders. You can't hear the general, you can barely see the enemy, but you can see the flash of his fan against the sun. One sharp wave and you fire dot, no word spoken, just movement dot, and it wasn't only the fans themselves, it was how they were held. A tilted angle might mean prepare to flank, a circular wave might mean encircle. Holding the fan still, hold position. The military choreography of feudal Japan was silent, yes, but not quiet. The tension hummed in every shoulder, every glance, every breath held, just a beat longer than necessary dot. The elegance of this system was part of the samurai's philosophy. Words were considered clumsy, emotion was dangerous, but a fan could speak precisely. A fan never lied. Some generals even had assistants whose job was to polish the fan, maintain it, and ensure it snapped open with the right amount of flair, because drama mattered. A fan snapped too softly might be missed, too harshly it might signal panic, quirk of history. Some war fans had reflective surfaces on one side like tiny mirrors. This wasn't vanity, it was for light signaling. Flashing, coded sequences of reflected sunlight across long distances, samurai Morse code, if you like, particularly effective when commanding troops across valleys, riverbanks, or through narrow forest gaps. 1 flick for hold, 2 flicks for advance, 3 for fall back. You get the idea. These signals weren't always easy to master. There's a record from the 16th century where a misinterpreted fan command led to one flank of an army charging prematurely. The result, a tangled mess of friendly fire and trampled horses. The general, reportedly, never used that gesture again, replaced the assistant who'd handed him the wrong feeling fan. But the communication value didn't end on the battlefield. In castle sieges, a commander might extend a white fan across the parapet to offer parley. It meant, let's talk. But a red fan, that meant no quarter. One was peace, the other, annihilation. All from a fan dot. And then there's the court-martial tale of Lord Tadatoshi, who was once accused of treason. His only defense, he claimed he had meant to signal a retreat, not an advance. He even brought the fan into court to demonstrate the angle. Witnesses disagreed. Historians still argue whether he was lying or simply waving like a left-hander, when everyone expected a righty dot in the world of the samurai. Battlefield fans were not just tools, they were instruments of trust. They collapsed chaos into choreography. They distilled the fog of war into something quiet, exact, and beautiful. Of course, not every fan command was accepted with discipline. In the later Edo period, when standing armies replaced roving clans, some bored young commanders reportedly used their fans to trick new recruits waving commands, just to watch them scramble. One recorded prank involved a fake retreat, signaled during a training exercise that caused an entire cavalry line to bolt into a pond. The commander laughed. His horse did not. Still, fan signals were sacred. They were tested, practiced, and memorized to the point of instinct, like the steady rhythm of breathing, or the way you fold your clothes after decades of doing it. The same way, it's hard not to admire the simplicity of it all. In an age when everything seems to beep, buzz, or shout, there's something comforting about an army led by the quiet whisper of a folding fan. One motion, one ripple of cloth and steel, and then movement. So tonight, as your body rests and your thoughts begin to slow, imagine yourself in that silent army. Your armor is heavy, but your hands are sure. The fan is raised high in the distance. Its silhouette cuts cleanly across the sky. One flick, and the world moves. You sit cross-legged in the candlelit corner of a war tent. Outside, the wind rustles through tall grasses and pine boughs. Inside, your general speaks softly, not with words, but with flicks of a fan. 3 sharp folds, one open, slow, a pause, then a wave, just once, from left to right. You nod. The orders are clear, no scroll needed, no ink spilled, just folds, flicks, and fluttering meaning. Tonight, we decode the secret language of the fan, a martial communication style, as subtle as it is brilliant, as quiet as moonlight but as precise as a sharpened blade. You'll find no Morse code here, no flags, just an ancient symphony of motion, where each twitch of the wrist could shift the tide of war. Shift blame. To understand this, you have to forget how language normally works. No syllables, no sounds. In samurai command culture, gestures replaced verbs, angles stood in for punctuation. The fan was a visual sentence, a communication system only insiders could decipher. Take a folded fan, for instance. Held vertically, that might mean hold position. Laid flat on the knee, await further instruction. Turned horizontally, like a baton across the lap, prepare to move. Subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but to a trained samurai, it shouted louder than a bugle. Of course, commands varied between clans. Historians still argue whether certain signals like an upward snap, meaning retreat, or an open and close wave, indicating surround, were standardized across regions or developed independently by local warlords. Some claim the Takeda clan had over 30 unique fan gestures. Others say that's an exaggeration, that most samurai only needed a handful of well-drilled moves to function in battle. Still, there's something romantic about the idea. Warriors speaking in code, not through encrypted radios or fire beacons, but through gestures choreographed into silence. Some modern martial arts schools even teach a symbolic version of this fan language, not for battle, but for memory. The fan as a cultural relic, still whispering across centuries. Now imagine yourself during a siege. The castle walls loom above you. The general sits behind a screen, barely visible. You're one of 5 messengers assigned to deliver orders to the flanks. No spoken words, just fans. The general raises his flicks, it open with a single snap, and slowly rotates his wrist. You study the motion like a scholar reading an ancient script. It's deliberate, graceful, and terrifyingly final. You bow, run, and deliver the message. Breach the left wall. But fans weren't just used in battle orders. They spoke politics. At formal gatherings, fans were used to send signals without ever speaking. Opened fully and placed face down. A message of disapproval, half opened and tapped twice on the knee. Agreement, passed hand to hand while folded. A confidential request, passed with a subtle bow. A plea for forgiveness or favor. One document from the Yoshikaga shogunate describes a complex fan-based etiquette system, almost like a miniature semaphore code. These fans became part of diplomacy itself. Peace offers, surrender negotiations, even assassination warnings were folded and waved into existence. And like any code, the fan language wasn't immune to double meanings. The same flick could be misread depending on context. Open wide to quickly, and what was meant as come forward might be misread as advance now. Close to softly, and withdraw might look like ignore. More than one battlefield turned bloody due to a poorly timed gesture. Take the example of the Siege of Kawago in 1545. According to some accounts, the Wasugi general attempted a night maneuver using only fan signals from atop the battlements, but a low fog drifted in, and several flank units misread the wave of his fan, thinking it was a retreat signal. They backed away, leaving a gap in the line. The HJ forces rushed in, collapsing the formation. Historians still debate whether the general waved the wrong way, or if the fan angle simply appeared reversed from the field. So yes, reading fans was an art, but misreading them was a disaster. There were also deceptive gestures, false signals. intended to confuse spies or enemy scouts. A commander might open a fan wide and walk visibly across a ridge, signaling full charge in the most obvious fashion possible, only for his troops to actually retreat under cover while the enemy braces for an attack that never comes. Like stagecraft, but with thousands of lives on the line. And in the world of espionage, fans were gold. A spy embedded in an enemy camp might observe only the commander's fan movements from a distance. Was the fan lifted 3 times during a morning drill? That could signal a planned march. Was it opened only halfway at sunset? That might indicate a scouting party returning. Entire counterintelligence manuals, now mostly lost, were believed to decode rival fan habits. But what about everyday samurai? Those not commanding entire armies? Well, even they used fan gestures, just on a smaller scale. A subtle tap of the fan against the thigh might mean ready. Holding it like a shield near the face could signal stay alert. Flicking it downward near the foot, trouble coming. Even gestures between comrades were common. You and a fellow warrior might agree on a signal, say, 2 taps and a flick to indicate a flank maneuver during a chaotic skirmish. It was personal code, passed between brothers in arms. But perhaps the most poetic use of fans came during peace talks, when warlords sat across from each other, surrounded by wary guards. The fans did the talking long before mouths did. One would flick his fan open but hold it steady and offer. The other would open his butt, tilted hesitation. Only when both fans rested flat on their laps did the discussion truly begin. Like fencing, but without swords. And then, of course, there were the false fans, decorative ones used only to disguise emotion. A general feeling rage might fan himself slowly to hide his trembling fingers. A courtier fearing exposure might open a large fan before his mouth, speaking softly behind it to mask tension. In the samurai world, revealing too much emotion was a weakness. The fan, once again, became the perfect shield, both literally and symbolically. As you lie back tonight, think of that. The quiet, the coded, the almost invisible world of fluttered meanings and folded messages. A language without sound, a form of speech that needed no voice. The battlefield was loud, but the real orders came in silence. So fold yourself now, like a fan at rest. Let your thoughts slow. Let each breath become a gesture, quiet, deliberate, understood. The fan opens with a soft snap, a flick of the wrist. A breeze might follow, but the heat is already there, not from the weather, but from the rising temper of 2 proud samurai, each holding a weapon that isn't quite a weapon yet. You sit under the sweltering sun, armor clanking softly with every shift. Around you, the tension is thick as boiled rice. Today's standoff isn't about blades or blood, at least, not yet. It's about pride, about posture, and strangely, about fans. Yes, those fans, lacquered, painted, folded, and opened in elegant flares. They look harmless, even graceful. But don't let the aesthetics fool you. These fans are like wolves in origami clothing. And in this world, where honor is everything, and subtlety is its sharpest expression, even the way you wave one can start a war, or end one. Right now, across from you, a rival samurai raises his fan, not high, just slightly above his chin. You recognize the motion. It's not cooling, it's goading. He's inviting you into a verbal duel, ritual of insults, smirks, and yes, aggressive fan waving. It's a bit like a Shakespearean roast battle, but with more potential for sudden stabbing. This is the art of controlled rage. Before swords are drawn, tempers are tested, and the tessenar, ostensibly a tool for cooling off, becomes a spark for combustion. The samurai world was rigid in structure, strict in rules, and obsessed with appearances. You didn't just walk into a fight yelling, you made an entrance. You tested the water, and fans were the perfect tool for that. The way you snapped one open could speak volumes. Was it lazy and bored? Then you thought your opponent beneath you. Was it sharp, vertical, like a blade? Then you meant business. One flick could insult a man's father. A slow, deliberate close could question his honor. In battlefields and in dueling grounds, arguments often began with silence and fans, and the best samurai were fluent in Tessen sarcasm. One famous account tells of the duel between Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kajiri, legendary swordsmen. While their final duel didn't involve fans directly, stories around their earlier interactions are packed with little moments of tension. In one embellished version, Musashi delays his arrival intentionally, shows up with a wooden sword carved from an oar, and during the wait, you guessed it, Kojiro sat beneath a pine tree, his fan twitching with mounting rage. Historians still argue whether such details were true or theatrical embellishment, but it paints the picture well. In the world of the samurai, waiting was war, posture was offense, and the humble fan was a flag of intent. Let's move from the battlefield to the tea house. Yes, tea houses, those tranquil, incense-perfumed sanctuaries tucked behind paper screens and bamboo gardens. You might imagine peace, and you'd be right. But beneath that peace simmered tension and fans. They were part of the show. At formal tea ceremonies, samurai often placed their fans in front of them on the tatami mat, not to be opened or waved, but to create a symbolic boundary between themselves and others. It was a signal. I acknowledge you. I respect your space. Don't cross it. But cross it someone often did. A fan held too close could mean suspicion. A fan held open during tirade, but not unheard of, might signal aggression, even mockery. In tight rooms with delicate egos and sharper swords, fans became something more than fashion. They were a form of psychological fencing. One documented moment from the Edo period describes a low-ranking official using his fan to shade himself while a higher-ranking guest was speaking. That didn't go over well. The insult was recorded. The man was removed from service a month later. He wasn't struck. He wasn't shouted at. He was simply erased, all because of a fan and a frown. And here's something unexpected. Fans as flirting tools. Yes, even in armor, even with blood oaths and bushido breathing down their necks, samurai could flirt. At festivals or formal court gatherings, fans became a bridge not just between warriors and their rivals, but sometimes, very delicately, between warriors and women. A hidden glance over an open fan, a coy wrist turn. The way a fan was held at the lips could signal everything from interest to disdain. The right fan, elaborately painted with cranes or moonlight, sent a message. I'm cultured. I'm refined. I didn't die in battle, so I'm available. One lord even commissioned a set of fans with poems hidden in the folds, poems he'd only revealed to someone he considered worthy. You can almost imagine it, can't you? The slow, theatrical unfold of a tesson, to reveal not steel but verse. Of course, this wasn't common practice. Most samurai weren't Casanovas. But the fact that it happened at all, delightfully human. Now, let's pull back to a military moment. Fans not just as emotional weapons, but tactical ones. Imagine a commander on a ridge. His army waits below. He raises a war fan, not the folding kind, but the gun be rigid, rounded, often carved from solid wood or iron. He holds it aloft and pauses. Then, in a fluid motion, sweeps it left. The soldiers watch. A signal. That fan just gave an entire platoon the order to flank the enemy. No shouting, no banners, just one graceful arc. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Modern military hand signals, air traffic control paddles, even conductors, batons, many owe something to this idea. The body as a communicator, the fan as a command. But not everyone handled fans well. There are stories, some likely young, brash warriors misusing fans during tense negotiations. One tale tells of a samurai who, during peace talks, grew impatient, snapped his fan shut with a loud crack, and broke the mood entirely. The opposing warlord stood, bowed politely, and left the tent. War resumed the next morning. Another fringe account claims a wandering ronin once challenged a group of bandits using only a metal-ribbed fan and won. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, poetic, or completely fictional. But in every telling, the fan is never just a prop. It's a choice. A calm fan can cool tempers. A loud fan can ignite them. And in samurai Japan, where emotions were often buried beneath discipline, fans gave those emotions shape, expression, form. So tonight, if you're lying there with a ceiling fan humming above you, or a folding one on your shelf, imagine this: a battlefield without noise, where one man raises a fan not to cool off, but to challenge, to provoke, to stand his ground not with brute force, but with elegance sharpened into threat. In this world, the fan was the fuse. You sit on the tatami floor, legs folded neatly. The soft aroma of roasted matcha lingers in the air. Outside, the garden whispers with the sound of rustling bamboo and trickling water. Inside, all is still, peaceful, meditative. But beneath this polished calm, something darker simmers. Because this isn't just a tea ceremony. This is a performance of power, of control, of reputation, and in rare, infamous cases, of death. You're not here just to sip tea. You're here to play a part in a dance where one wrong glance, one flick of the wrist, might end with a blade between your ribs. The Japanese tea ceremony, or shanoyu, is built on grace, discipline, and serenity. But in the world of samurai, it was also a stage, a place where honor was tested just as sharply. As on the battlefield, tea rooms became the perfect places to settle old debts, deliver private messages, or if you were subtle and bold, execute a quiet, elegant murder. Yes, a murder. Over tea. Imagine being invited into one of these rooms. You're told it's for a peaceful gathering, a discussion of poetry, perhaps, or a final resolution to a long-standing disagreement. You bow, smile, remove your shoes. Everything seems perfectly orchestrated. But your host may have other intentions. See, the tea room wasn't just designed for tranquility. Its architecture actually encouraged control. The entrance was low, requiring everyone regardless of status to stoop and humble themselves before entering. You couldn't carry long weapons inside. The room was sparse. Everything had its place, from the ladle to the scroll hanging on the wall. But with so few objects, the items that were allowed in stood out more. A small fan, a paper scroll, a decorative dagger, that last one, not always just for show. The infamous case of Akechi Mitsuhide still echoes through these tea rooms. You might remember him as the samurai who betrayed Oda Nobunaga. Yes, that Oda Nobunaga, the warlord who basically steamrolled most of Japan in the late 1500s. But before that betrayal played out on the battlefield, there were whispers into Tamil rooms, meetings over tea, subtle gestures, the calm before the storm. It's said that Mitsuhide used a tea gathering to discuss grievances with his lord, an apology, a final warning. Historians still argue whether it was a setup or a genuine effort to resolve tensions. But one thing is clear. Shortly after that encounter, Nobunaga was ambushed and forced into ritual suicide seppuku inside a Kyoto temple. The betrayal wasn't forged with steel first. It was brewed, gently, in a tea bowl. And what about the fan? Ah yes, the fan made its way into the tea room too. Not as a cooling device, remember. Samurai were in layers of armor, but they still prized decorum. These fans, often made of iron or hardwood, could double as weapons. They were small enough to pass inspection, decorative enough to seem innocent, but one quick flick, and they could break a nose or crush a windpipe. You sit across from your host. He smiles. He reaches for his fan, unfolding it slowly. It's part of the performance, you think? He gestures to the scroll, makes a comment about impermanence. You nod, take another sip. Then he sets the fan down gently, just within reach. Maybe you noticed, maybe you don't now. Not every tea room turned into a murder scene, but the tension always hovered just beneath the surface, especially during Sankan Keitai, the system where regional lords daimyo were required to travel to the capital and spend alternating years in Edo. Tea ceremonies were common among these visits, and in a political world thick with rivalry and suspicion, these gatherings could feel less like social events and more like minefields. Even the utensils became tools of symbolic messaging. A particular kind of ladle might suggest humility. A ceramic bowl might be gifted as an apology, or it might be a warning. I know what you did. Historians still debate the coded language behind certain tea sets exchanged during the Edo period. Were they peace offerings or threats wrapped in porcelain? And then there was Sen no Rikyuya, the tea master who made wabi-sabi aesthetics, famous simplicity, imperfection, and transience. But even his life ended in political violence. He offended the wrong man. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Japan's most powerful warlords. It's still unclear exactly how, but records show that Rikyuya was ordered to commit suicide. One of the most peaceful men in Japanese history, killed not on a battlefield, but from political offense. Likely decided, over tea. Can you imagine? A room so still you can hear the water boiling, and yet, just beneath the tatami floor, the earth seems to tremble with secrets. In this world, silence was louder than any shout. Averted eyes, subtle hand movements, the angle of a teacup, everything meant something, and everything could mean danger. If you were unlucky, a sip of tea could be the last thing you ever tasted. Not poisoned. Necessarily this wasn't a ninja movie, but it might be the final act before a concealed blade was drawn. The tea room trained samurai in patience, perception, and restraint, but it also trained them in control, psychological warfare. An enemy who panics loses. A man who twitches too early is a dead man. So they learned to sit in perfect stillness even when the air felt thick with the scent of betrayal. You probably wouldn't survive a tea ceremony like this, not because you'd be stabbed hopefully, but because of the discipline required. Just to sit there, back straight, mouth quiet, heart pounding. It was a battlefield of the mind, a ceremony of masks. And through it all, the fan was there unfolded like a flower, delicate yet dangerous. You leave the room, or maybe you don't. Maybe you become a story told in whispers, long after the tea has gone cold. One more name erased, but one more fan left behind. So, here you are again sitting cross-legged in the dimly lit hall of a samurai school, or DJ, somewhere in 16th century Japan. You're sweating already, and not just from the humidity. The sensei before you isn't holding a sword, or even a staff. No, he's holding a fan. But don't let the elegance fool you. This is Tessen Jutsu, the martial art of fighting with an iron war fan, or tessen, and while it may not slice a man in half like a katana, don't get too comfortable. A single strike from one of these things can knock you flat on your back, knock the blade from your hand, or knock the air right out of your lungs. And in the right hands, it's downright deadly. You raise an eyebrow as your opponent steps into position. They look calm, confident, graceful. Even then, with a blur of movement, the fan flashes forward your vision, blinks on suddenly. You're on the floor. Welcome to TESS, ENJUTSU. The idea of turning something as delicate as a fan into a lethal weapon seems, on the surface, almost comical. But the tessen was a product of both necessity and ingenuity. During the Edo period, for example, samurai were sometimes forbidden to carry swords in certain places like a noble's court, a temple, or even a in these tightly controlled environments, the need to defend oneself didn't disappear, it just got SNAKIER. Enter the iron fan. TESS, ENJUTS. He became a way to defend, disarm, and even kill without ever appearing to be armed in the first place. These war fans were usually made with iron ribs, sometimes completely disguised beneath lacquered paper or silk. In some versions, the tessen wasn't even foldable at all, just a solid, heavy piece of iron, shaped like a closed fan, carried like an accessory but wielded like a mace. So how did it work? In training, Tessenjutsu teaches you precision, speed, and deception. You learn to parry strikes with the fan's edge, redirect energy, and use circular movements to disorient. The fan could block a downward sword cut, then whip around to slam into a face, throat, or temple. And here's the best part. It wasn't just about brute force. Tessenjutsu relied heavily on technique and misdirection. A practiced samurai could distract an opponent by fluttering the fan mid-duel, faking weakness before landing a stunning counterattack. It was about calm, control, and reading the opponent's breath. It also blended beautifully with other martial arts like jujitsu, grappling, and kenjutsu swordsmanship. In close quarters, when blades were too long or dangerous to draw, the tessen became an extension of the warrior's body, quick, subtle, and devastating. There's an old story of the legendary swordsman Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who was ambushed. At court, he wasn't carrying a sword, those were forbidden inside the palace, but his enemies weren't so respectful. According to the tale, he used a tessen to block a surprise sword strike, disarmed his attacker with one sweeping motion, and brought the iron fan crashing down hard enough to end the fight. Now, whether he really performed this cinematic move is, well, debatable. Historians still argue whether Yoshitsune's tessen feats were historical fact or glorified myth, added to bolster the noble image of a warrior poet. What we do know is that tales like these weren't uncommon. The tessen became a kind of cultural symbol, equal parts elegance and danger. You can imagine it, can't you? A high-ranking daimyo strolling into court, nodding calmly, sleeves flowing and at his waist, a beautiful folded fan, painted cranes maybe, or cherry blossoms, look ceremonial, peaceful. Until someone insults his clan. Then that same fan unfolds, with a sharp click, and before the guards can react, the attacker is flat on his back, bleeding from the mouth, and the court is silent. The weapon was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Not everyone learned Tessenjutsu though. It was considered a specialized skill often taught to bodyguards, courtiers, and those who couldn't always carry a sword. Some samurai wives were even trained in it, using smaller versions called gunbai uchiwa to protect themselves at home. The art extended beyond the battlefield and into the quieter but no less dangerous corridors of political power. There were also ceremonial fans used to give commands on the battlefield, those large, rounded fans you've seen in paintings. These weren't necessarily for fighting, but a general who mastered tessenjutsu might still know how to turn even those into makeshift shields or clubs when things got ugly. One curious tidbit: some of the tessen fans were hollow and used to carry secret messages, powders, or even poisons. Others were designed with razor-sharp edges hidden beneath silk, so they could slice as well as strike. There's at least one record of a fan that doubled as a blowgun, though that may have been more ninja territory than samurai. And then, of course, there's the unverified but deeply satisfying idea that some fans were magnetized to throw off enemy compass readings or to confuse a rival's armor pieces if they contained metal. Historians remain divided on this, but hey, if it helps you imagine a fan-wielding samurai short-circuiting a battlefield with a flick of his wrist, we too stop you. Tessenjutsu might not be taught in most modern dojos, but it lives on in katas demonstrations and period dramas. There's something timeless about it, how it takes an object associated with calm, beauty, and leisure and weaponizes it with grace, like a cherry blossom laced with venom. And in a strange way, it speaks to a deeper truth about samurai life. Even in times of peace, the warrior must remain vigilant. Even in silence, he must be ready. Even with the fan in hand, he must fight like a storm is coming. So next time you hold a fan to your face on a hot summer day, remember you're holding something that once parried swords, knocked warriors unconscious, and protected honor in the most unexpected of ways. Fold it carefully, and maybe, just maybe, keep your guard up. You're standing on a stone bridge at dusk. Below, a slow river carries petals from distant cherry trees. The sky is a dreamy watercolor of lavender and gold. Somewhere far off, a flute plays soft and lonely, and in front of you, a samurai unsheathes his katana. The hiss of metal slices the silence like a breath caught too late. He steps forward. You don't move. You're holding a fan. Ridiculous, right? That paper-thin object with delicate bamboo ribs, good for waving away heat or looking fancy at quarters. No business facing down 3 feet of folded steel. But then, with a calm flick of the wrist, you parry, not with desperation, not with speed, with confidence, because in your hand isn't just any fan, it's a tessen, a war fan, reinforced with iron spokes, deceptively light, and shaped with the precision of a weapon designed to hide in plain sight. And in this moment, as the katana comes down, it's not the sword that wins, it's the fan that blocks it. This isn't a legend. Well, okay, maybe, it's mostly legend, but there are whispers of truth woven into it. Throughout the Sengoku and Edo periods, there were real accounts of samurai using tessen to deflect swords, knives, and even arrows at close range. While not a replacement for a full-blown katana in open battle, the tessen was often the last thing standing between a samurai and death, especially when caught off guard or forbidden from bearing arms in sacred awe. Political spaces. One such tale read holds so many times its practically myth centers around the daimyo Takahashi, who attended a high-level tea ceremony during a time of tense negotiations. Now, the rules of etiquette were strict. No weapons in the tea room. Peace was expected. But Kyosuke knew better, and he carried his tessen tucked neatly into the sash of his kimono, like any other formal accessory. When his rival, Lord Endo, lost his temper and drew a concealed dagger, it was Kyosuke's iron fan that snapped upward and deflected the blade, not with brute strength, but with the perfect angle and timing. He countered with a strike to Endo's temple, not fatal, but humiliating, and the dispute ended, with one man dazed and the other still sipping his matcha. Historians still argue whether this duel actually happened. Some insist it's a romanticized fable. Others point to obscure clan records and suggest that even if the names are fictional, the event echoes the very real practice of tessenjutsu, fan fighting used in close quarters, self-defense. But what's not up for debate is how the tessen wasn't just a weapon of convenience. It became a symbol of intelligence over brute force. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of feudal Japan, hidden in plain sight. Stylish enough for a nobleman, dangerous enough for a warrior. The fan's construction was deceptively elegant. Some were solid iron, appearing just like folded fans but with weighted razor-sharp edges. Others used hollow metal ribs coated in lacquer and painted with floral designs, disguising them as innocent accessories. Many included blunt tips, ideal for strikes to pressure points or joints. You wouldn't need to kill someone to end a confrontation. Just break their wrist, or knock the wind out of them and walk away calm, collected, alive. And it wasn't only men who carried them. High-ranking female samurai known as onobugatia fans had ornate fans that doubled as concealed weapons. One record mentions Lady Takako Nakano, who is more famously known for her naginata skills, but was also trained to use a tessen as a last line of defense in courtly environments. Because if you're invited to a feast by a political rival, you'd better bring something sharper than your conversation. Now imagine the pressure. You're at court, no sword, no armor. Everyone's smiling, bowing, complimenting the calligraphy, and still, danger hums just beneath the surface like a wasp inside a sake cup. Your hand rests on your lap, near your fan. Not in aggression, just readiness. That's what made the tessen so genius. It was the perfect balance of civility and violence, a reminder that war didn't always wear armor. Sometimes, it wore silk. There's even evidence that some fans were outfitted to throw like shuriken. A sharp flick of the wrist could send one spinning at an enemy's face from across a room. Rare, yes, but effective. You wouldn't want a blink dot in one strange and wonderful tale from the mid-Edo period. A samurai named Itojubi used his fan to block a sword and simultaneously disarm the attacker by trapping the blade between the ribs of the tessen. Now, physics might raise a few eyebrows. Here, steel catching steel without snapping like a twig seems dubious, but the story persists. Possibly because it illustrates the deepest truth of samurai myth, the idea that skill, not size, determines the victor. And hey, maybe that's why the tessen holds such an odd place in Japanese martial history. It straddles the line between accessory and weapon, decoration and danger, civility and savagery. You could hand one to an old poet or a trained killer, no one would blink. It allowed warriors to walk into peace talks armed, without ever breaking the rules. Today, tessenjutsu is still taught in a handful of dojos. It's not as common as swordsmanship or archery, but it persists. Practitioners train to use precise flicks, blocks, and strikes to disable opponents. YouTube's full of grainy videos, grandmasters in pristine hakama demonstrating fan kata under cherry trees. There's an oddly calming rhythm to it, like Tai Chi, but with more bruises. One could argue the modern equivalent is carrying pepper spray in a designer purse, or a tactical pen disguised as a Mont Blanc. Different time, same instinct. Stay elegant, stay alive. So next time you see a fan displayed in a museum, don't dismiss it as decoration. It might have saved a life. It might have ended one. And it definitely once blocked a sword. You adjust your posture, brushing imaginary dust from your robe, and step into the grand hall of a daimyo's court. Polished, cedar floors gleam like still water beneath flickering candlelight. The air is thick with incense, sweet, woody, and just a bit aggressive. And there, surrounding the central figure of the daimyo himself, are the men who hold true power, not the warriors outside sharpening their swords, but the ones who flick open their ornate fans and raise an eyebrow at just the right moment. Yes, tonight you've entered a world where gossip is sharper than a katana, where the rustle of silk means more than a battle cry. Welcome to the elite circles of the daimyo courts, where being a fanboy wasn't an insult. It was a career. In these refined chambers of political maneuvering and poetic duel, the fan evolved far beyond a weapon of war. It became a symbol of intellect, a tool of diplomacy, and when necessary a silent signal of calculated betrayal. Here, in the presence of power draped in brocade, you had better wield your fan as deftly as a ninja wields his shuriken. First, let's set the stage. The daimyo regional lords who ruled over their respective provinces maintained courts filled with attendants, advisors, poets, and bureaucrats. These weren't just decorative roles. Each individual was a player in a high-stakes game of status, loyalty, and survival. And just like any modern political office or reality show cast, optics mattered. Your look, your grace, your fans, particularly the folding kind known as GG, became almost as crucial as your sword in this space. Not only did they display your wealth and taste like hard ribs, gold leaf detailing, family crests, but they were your portable message board. Raise one side slightly while bowing, That meant you acknowledged a compliment, but didn't return. It covered half your face while a poem was read aloud. Either it moved you, or you're suppressing laughter. Historians still argue whether these coded fan signals were widely understood, or just an affectation of the bored aristocracy. Either way, everyone played along, and the daimyo, they were the trendsetters. If a daimyo preferred silver fans with black crane motifs, guess what the entire inner circle suddenly adored? Cranes everywhere. Cranes on fans, cranes on kimono linings, cranes embroidered on their pillowcases. For all we know, being out of step with the daimyo's preferences was like showing up to a job interview in a clown wig. It didn't matter if your resume screamed samurai elichi, you were getting laughed out of the courtyard. One famous story comes from the court of Date Masamune, the one-eyed warlord, known for both his military brilliance and love of aesthetics. It's said that Masamune once dismissed a high-ranking official not for incompetence or betrayal but for bringing a fan with a peony motif during chrysanthemum season. A warrior must know the rhythm of the land, he reportedly declared. Harsh, yes, but fashion faux pas at the daimyo level could cost you more than embarrassment. They could cost you your position, or even your life. Yet, it wasn't all pettiness. There were legitimate reasons the fan held such importance. In the closed ecosystem of the court, where hierarchy was everything and direct confrontation was taboo, fans acted like emotional armor. You didn't frown in disapproval, you tilted your fan just so. You didn't openly flirt, you let your fan flutter just long enough to be noticed. It was a non-verbal language. Those who mastered it moved up. Those who didn't, well, they ended up posted to the provinces, or worse, reassigned to temple duty, counting grains of rice in the storerooms of Kyoto. Of course, this world also had its divas, those courtiers who took fan-wielding to dramatic new levels. One record from the mid-1700s tells of a man named Ushioda Tamitsugu, who arrived at the daimyo's court in Edo with a fan so large and elaborate it required a servant to carry it. Covered in mother-of-pearl and inked with a full moon and ocean waves, the fan unfolded to a nearly absurd 5 feet. It was pure theater, and people were scandalized. But the daimyo, he was impressed. Ushioda was promoted to a poetry consultant, and his fan earned him a nickname, the Tidebringer. And don't forget the women of the court. Though most samurai wives weren't part of military campaigns, they played powerful roles behind the scenes, especially in cultural diplomacy. Women mastered fan etiquette as young girls, learning not just how to signal interest or disapproval, but how to balance it with musical performances, calligraphy, and, of course, the delicate art of poetry. One aristocratic woman named Lady Senheim was known for composing haiku directly onto her fans in ink made from crushed iris petals. Sometimes she'd leave them accidentally behind at court gatherings, a subtle way to let someone know you were thinking of them, or warning them. Interpretations varied. Even the fan you carried said something about your temperament. A white silk fan with painted cherry blossoms meant refinement and sensitivity. A bold black fan with a red sunburst suggested ambitions, some might say arrogance. There were even fan-based personality typologies, much like today's horoscopes. Ah, a courtier might whisper, he carries a bronze-ribbed hawk fan. A dangerous man, that one. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds very dramatic, well, it was. But it was also strategic, because in a court filled with whispers, power plays, and the constant threat of falling from favor, the fan was more than decoration. It was a character shield, a performance prop, a veiled dagger, and sometimes, just sometimes, it was a literal weapon, as in the case of Tessen, the war fan, which some elite courtiers carried in disguised form. Yes, the daimyo court was filled with fanboys, but not the screaming groupies we imagine today. These were sharp-minded, quick-tongued diplomats and schemers, using every inch of their silk fans to navigate a world where a single misstep could be fatal. And in this powdered, perfumed jungle, it wasn't always the strongest who survived. It was the most graceful, the most observant, the one who knew exactly when to close their fan, and when to let it speak for them. You sit beneath a pine tree, mid-afternoon sun filtering softly through the branches above you, casting speckled shadows across the scroll in your lap. In your hands, you turn a folding fan, simple, lacquered black, rimmed in gold. It's beautiful, yes, but also deadly. You give it a flick of the wrist, and it snaps open with a satisfying crack. Now imagine that flick isn't just for battle. Imagine the fan slicing through the air and drawing blood before the enemy even has time to blink. Tonight, you'll discover that samurai fans weren't always for blocking blades or hiding expressions. Sometimes, they struck first, and they struck hard. By the mid-1500s, warfare in Japan had become a chaotic blend of tradition and innovation. While some samurai clung tightly to their ancestral swords and family codes, others embraced firearms, guerrilla tactics, and, yes, fans that could split skin and shatter bone. You probably weren't expecting something as soft and poetic as a fan to be responsible for opening a wound. But here we are. These weren't your everyday paper fans from the local market stall. The tesson, or iron fan, was forged with metal slats, sometimes coated in lacquer, to disguise their lethality. To the untrained eye, they looked like ceremonial accessories, but in the hands of a trained samurai, they were as dangerous as a tanta. In fact, tessenjutsu, the martial art of fighting with a fan, was a recognized discipline in several samurai schools, and within that art lay one particularly dramatic goal: using the fan to draw first blood. Historians still argue whether the first fan-designed kill was symbolic or practical. Did it come in ritual duels, or in street-level assassinations? One theory suggests that fans were initially allowed in court precisely because they weren't seen as weapons. Swords, banned in many formal settings. Knives, checked at the door. But a fan, that was just etiquette, except when it wasn't. There's a particularly infamous tale from the Sengoku period involving a high-ranking retainer named Saji Shigemasa. According to one version of the legend, he was summoned to a tense diplomatic meeting between rival clans. Everyone in the room was unarmed. At least, Shigemasa, however, carried his iron fan. When his rival insulted him openly, Shigemasa bowed deeply, then rose and struck. The fan's edge split the man's eyebrow in half, blood soaking into the tatami. The message was clear. Even the most refined samurai could bleed, and sometimes courtesy concealed chaos. Now, was this story exaggerated over generations? Most likely. Some versions say it was a full decapitation. Others say it was a shallow graze. The one consistent detail: blood on the floor and a fan that didn't flutter, but slashed. But this wasn't just a rogue impulse among hot-tempered warriors. In certain contexts, drawing first blood with a fan became a deliberate, strategic move. Remember that samurai duels were sometimes not about death, but about dominance. If you could make your opponent flinch or even bleed before a sword was drawn, you'd already claimed psychological high ground. In some cases, that flick of the fan ended the confrontation entirely. A cut across the cheek, a jab to the neck, a blunt whack to the nose. Grace, with a hint of humiliation. There's an obscure anecdote involving a lesser-known samurai named Arima Tadayuki. He was said to be a master of tessenjutsu, and reportedly trained under an obscure offshoot of the Yagib school. One day, while crossing a narrow bridge in the pouring rain, he encountered a belligerent ronin blocking his path. Words escalated. The ronin reached for his blade. Arima. He barely moved. His fan lashed out like lightning, cracking the man's wrist with a snap. The katana clattered into the water. Arima stepped over him, untouched. The fan didn't just draw blood, it ended battles before they began. You start to realize, these fans weren't a backup plan. They were a message, a symbol of readiness, but also of restraint. Because a samurai who drew blood with a fan was making a point. He didn't need a sword to dominate the space. He didn't need to shout, or posture, or escalate. His calm was sharper than steel. Of course, using a tesson to draw blood wasn't always acceptable. There were rules, unwritten maybe, but enforced with cultural weight. Striking with a fan in a formal setting like a daimyo's court was considered dishonorable, unless provoked. Think of it like flipping a chessboard mid-match. You better have a really good reason, or the rest of the clan might decide you're unstable. In fact, one historical document notes that a samurai who wounded a guest with a tesson was ordered to commit seppuku ritual suicide, not for the violence, but for the disruption of peace. Still, the allure of the fan persisted. Artists began to depict fans in mid-strike, frozen in graceful arcs. Poets wrote verses about blood drops flicked from the edge of lacquered iron, and in rare cases, the fan was used in duels where both warriors agreed to fight without swords, just fans. Yes, that was a thing, not common, but real. Imagine two combatants circling each other under the moonlight, iron fans snapping open and shut like steel butterflies, One wrong move, and you'd go home with a fractured nose and a serious bruise to your pride. There was also a more theatrical angle to fan combat. In some samurai households, young boys were taught basic Tessin techniques before they were old enough to wield swords. It was a way to instill discipline, coordination, and a sense of quiet danger. You don't need to roar to be powerful. You don't need to be loud to be feared. Just flick, aim, and breathe. And yes, some fans were even designed to hide blood. The darker the lacquer, the less likely your opponent or the court would notice you'd drawn blood. A sneaky advantage. One Kyoto craftsman reportedly made fans with obsidian-colored ribs for exactly that purpose. Hard to prove, but juicy to imagine. So tonight, as you drift further into sleep, picture a world where elegance hid danger, where silence struck first, and where fans weren't symbols of gentleness, but triggers for transformation. You're holding one in your hand now, aren't you? Just for a moment. You flick it open, not for air, but for strategy. You don't have to swing it. Just knowing it's there is enough. Before the rise of global fashion capitals like Paris and Milan, before runway shows dazzled crowds with silk, sequins, and spotlight, feudal Japan had already embraced a quiet revolution in style, and at the center of that cultural movement was the unassuming, but deeply expressive, folding fan. While Westerners might think of the fan merely as a tool to beat the summer heat, in Edo period Japan, fans weren't just accessories, they were statements of wealth, of taste, of allegiance, of philosophy. And in the polished courts and quiet gardens of the samurai elite, fans strutted their own kind of catwalk, carried, not worn, but judged just as harshly. When we talk about fans in fashion, it's important to understand that we're not speaking about mere ornamentation. The folding fan, Jiji or Sensu, and the rigid flat fan, Uchiwa, became symbols of identity, portable works of art, and coded indicators of status. What kind of fan you carried and how you carried it could elevate your presence or betray your lack of breeding. In many ways, the samurai's fan was like a designer handbag or custom-tailored suit in today's language, and just like fashion brands today create limited editions, so too did fan artisans craft one-of-a-kind masterpieces that only the elite could possess. During the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, when Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate and peace allowed culture to flourish, a sort of fan renaissance took place. This was a time when the arts blossomed under strict social codes, and aesthetic expression became a subtle battlefield. Warriors weren't fighting wars anymore, they were cultivating poetry, calligraphy, and personal presentation, and the fan became one of their most beloved platforms for artistic self-expression. Each fan carried in the courts and salons of Edo told a silent story. Some were adorned with gold leaf, shimmering under candlelight as if lit from within. Others featured minimalist ink paintings, brushstrokes so sparse yet deliberate that Zen philosophy seemed folded into their very paper. Still others displayed family crests, symbols of power and legacy. And because fans were often made from washi paper and bamboo, artisans experimented with texture, weight, and sound, giving each fan a distinct feel and even a signature snap. When opened, fashion-conscious samurai, courtiers, and nobles would commission fans from renowned craftsmen, sometimes traveling to Kyoto or Osaka, cultural hubs, for the best materials and talent. These fans were often created in collaboration with poets, painters, and calligraphers. One fan might feature a verse by Basho, written in flowing brushstrokes across a painted mountain scene. Another could depict a crane taking flight, a symbol of longevity against a backdrop of rising mist. Carrying such a fan wasn't just about looking refined, it was about signaling your intellect, your aesthetic values, your cultural alliances. Much like haute couture today, there were trends and seasons. Spring fans might showcase cherry blossoms or plum trees. Summer fans leaned into cool imagery, waterfalls, fish, or the moon reflected on rippling water. Autumn fans brought in fiery maple leaves and poems about the coming chill. Winter fans were stoic, often stark in color, but rich in symbolism, bamboo bending in snow, or calligraphy that hinted at endurance and quiet strength. Seasonal fashion was very much alive, not in garments, but in accessories like the fan. Women, too, embraced the fashion of fans. For noble women and geisha alike, the fan was as essential as their kimono. While the folding fan was more common among men, women often favored the round uchiwa fans, especially in summer festivals. These fans became canvases for both art and flirtation. A slight flutter might signal amusement. A full cover of the face could hide a blush or conceal a knowing glance. In kabuki plays and woodblock prints, the flirtatious fan became a recurring visual motif. But make no mistake, fans weren't just about elegance, they were about spectacle. Formal ceremonies, especially those involving the imperial court or high-ranking daimyo, often featured elaborately coordinated fan displays. Entire dance performances were choreographed around the fan's movement. These weren't just accessories, they were central props, extending the body and amplifying expression. A slow, deliberate opening could signify revelation. A rapid flick, dismissal. A raised fan might be prayerful. A lowered one, contemplative. Some samurai clans even developed uniformed fans standardized in color and emblem. They functioned almost like military regalia. During diplomatic meetings or official parades, dozens of warriors might carry matching fans, creating a visual coherence that communicated unity and power. These fans, often lacquered or painted in deep indigo or blood red, sometimes bore the clan's mon or crest, proudly displayed for all to see. In this sense, the fan was also a uniform fashioned, not just for flair, but for identity. Interestingly, fans also began to shape broader social trends. As members of the merchant class rose in wealth during the Edo period, they sought to emulate the tastes of the samurai and court nobility. While sumptuary laws often prohibited commoners from wearing luxurious fabrics or carrying ornate weapons, there was less restriction around accessories. The fan became a loophole away for merchants to display sophistication and wealth without violating the rigid class codes. This drove up demand for affordable, mass-produced fans that mimicked the bespoke designs of the elite. This trickle-down effect led to the first fan economies. Entire neighborhoods in cities like Kyoto, Nagoya, and Edo, now Tokyo, became known for their fan workshops. Artisans worked in specialized roles. One made the paper, another painted, another assembled, and yet another lacquered the handles. Markets began to flood with fan designs inspired by kabuki actors, seasonal poetry, erotic scenes, and comic illustrations. Just like fashion houses today collaborate with celebrities, some fan makers began promoting their creations by associating them with popular actors or poets. Fans were no longer just about temperature or rank, they were entertainment, politics, and style folded into one. The influence of fan fashion even extended beyond Japan. When Japan reopened to the world during the Meiji Restoration in the late 1800s, Western visitors were captivated by the elegance of the fan. These objects became popular souvenirs and soon found their way into European and American wardrobes. The folding fan became a staple of Victorian high society, though its meaning was often stripped of its deep cultural roots. Still, the idea of the fan as a fashion item had officially gone global. Back in Japan, even as modernization surged and Western clothing became more common, fans refused to disappear. They were folded into the rituals of traditional theater, religious ceremonies, and cultural festivals. And in high society circles, they remained subtle symbols of refinement. To this day, Japanese weddings, tea ceremonies, and no performances still feature fans, not just for tradition's sake, but because they continue to carry beauty, meaning, and elegance that no other object quite matches. So, when one thinks of Fashion Week and envisions rows of models in avant-garde clothing, perhaps pause for a moment and picture something else: a quiet Kyoto garden in spring. A nobleman dressed in silk, pausing mid-step, flicks open his painted fan with grace. Around him, others do the same. And just like that, the air is filled, not with perfume, but with the whisper of paper and bamboo. Fashion, after all, doesn't always need a spotlight. Sometimes, it folds up neatly in your hand, says everything with a single snap, and disappears into silence. To understand the mystical heart of Japan, one must first understand its winds. In a land defined by shifting seasons, mountainous terrain, and sudden storms, wind was more than just weather, it was spirit, it was kami. The ancient Japanese didn't merely feel wind on their skin, they believed it was carried by deities, messengers from the unseen world. And few objects were more intimately tied to wind than the fan. Light as breath, sharp as intention, and sacred in movement, the Japanese fan became a bridge between the human and the divine. In myths, rituals, and warrior philosophies, Fans were not just man-made tools, they were believed to be fanned by the wind gods themselves. In the Shinto tradition, nature is alive with common-divine spirits that inhabit trees, rivers, rocks, and yes, the wind. The wind god, Fusion, is one of Japan's oldest deities, often depicted as a muscular demon-like figure carrying a great bag of air on his shoulders. He's a bringer of gales, storms, and change. Unlike Western mythology, where wind might be tamed or ignored, Japanese belief respected it as a powerful, willful force, and anything that danced with the wind like a fan was considered to be in conversation with the spirits. That's where the folding fan's spiritual symbolism begins. Opening a fan was not just an act of cooling oneself, it was an act of releasing energy into the world. When a fan was flicked open, the movement was seen as inviting the wind, honoring it, or even invoking its guidance. In religious rituals, priests would use fans to wave purifying air around sacred spaces. The fan's fluttering arc was believed to ward off malevolent spirits, much like how sage smoke is used in other cultures. A fan, moved with intention, was a sacred dance between human will and divine breath. But fans didn't only appear in temples, they were deeply tied to mythology and storytelling, too. One of the most famous examples comes from Japanese no and kabuki theater. In these highly symbolic performances, every gesture is packed with meaning. The fan, always present in the actor's hand, represents more than an object. It can symbolize wind, a heart, a sword, a bird, even a soul departing the body. In scenes involving divine intervention, the fan often flutters open just as the wind rises, suggesting that the gods themselves have entered the narrative. This is no coincidence. Playwrights and performers alike understood the fan's power as a symbolic conductor of unseen forces. A fan that opened with a gust of music could mean the arrival of a ghost. A slowly waving fan might represent the gentle breath of a god whispering into the ears of mortals. Audiences in Edo-era theaters were trained to see these signs in. When the fan moved, they held their breath, knowing something greater was at play. Beyond theater, fans were a part of Japan's creation mythology. In one version of the myth, the gods Izanagi and Izanami stood upon the floating bridge of heaven, stirring the ocean below with a jeweled spear. As the drops fell from the spear's tip, the islands of Japan were formed. Some later interpretations of this story likened the gentle swirls of the water to the patterns created by a fan moving air. Just as the gods stirred creation, so too did fans stir the invisible, shaping the spiritual world around them. In martial tradition, fans also carried divine association. The gun by Uchiwa, the rigid war fan used by samurai generals, was said to channel the favor of the wind gods. These fans weren't used for cooling, they were symbols of command and prophecy. A general raising his fan could mean it was time to attack, to retreat, or to hold. But more importantly, the gesture was seen as aligning the army's will with that of heaven. If the wind shifted favorably after a signal was given, it was interpreted as divine support. Some battle accounts even claim that when the fan rose, the wind literally changed direction, blowing dust into the enemy's eyes, or pushing arrows off course. Many samurai believed their fans could be blessed. They would take them to temples to be inscribed with protective charms or prayers written in delicate calligraphy along the ribs of the fan. These inscriptions were often invisible unless the fan was fully extended, suggesting that the sacred power within the fan was revealed only when opened, just as divine truths are revealed in moments of clarity. Such fans were carried not only as weapons or signals, but as spiritual shields. Fans also played a role in annual festivals that honored the wind gods directly. In parts of Kyoto and Nara, early summer was marked by ceremonies where fans were offered to shrines, placed on altars, or floated down rivers as symbolic gestures to Fusion and his divine brethren. These fans, often handmade and decorated with cranes, dragons, or swirling clouds, were given in hopes of favorable weather for rice planting or protection from typhoons. The very design of the fan, with its expanding shape and wind-catching motion, was seen as an offering that mimicked the essence of air itself. In visual art, this divine connection was also celebrated. Woodblock prints from the Edo period often featured fans caught in dramatic wind. A courtesan's fan blowing away might symbolize fate or fleeting beauty. A warrior gripping his fan in the eye of a storm could suggest defiance against divine will or, conversely, surrender to it. The wind in these images was never just background noise. It was mood, emotion, destiny. And the fan was always its dance partner. Even poetry wasn't immune to this metaphor. Haiku and tonka frequently paired wind and fans in subtle, poignant ways. A well-known poem from the Edo period reads, "On the folding fan, a painted breeze begins to move as thunderclouds rise." This simple verse blends art, nature, and divine movement. The fan does not just reflect the storm it begins it channels the wind, it becomes divine. So what does it mean then to say a fan is fanned by the wind gods? It means that these seemingly delicate tools were never just objects. They were always part of something larger, relationship with unseen forces, with shifting air and shifting fate. To open a fan was to open a portal. To wave a fan was to reach toward the heavens. And to carry a fan was to walk in the company of gods. Even today, in traditional Japanese dance and ceremonial settings, fans are still used with reverence. Priests wave fans to bless spaces. Dancers unfurl fans in slow, sacred arcs. Elderly artisans handcraft fans, not just with skill, but with prayer. And when a child flicks open a fan for the first time, somewhere deep in Japan's spiritual memory, the wind gods smile. Because in that simple, fluttering motion lies centuries of belief that the wind is not random, that movement is not meaningless, and that sometimes, when paper meets air, the divine stirs. In the annals of history, it is not always the grand weapons or glittering armor that leave the deepest mark. Sometimes it is the quiet presence of something unexpected, a fan, fluttering in the chaos that becomes the symbol of defiance. As Japan transitioned from an era of constant war to one of relative peace, under the Tokugawa shogunate, the battlefield changed. But even in times of social stability, there were those moments, small, personal, sometimes tragic, where a simple fan became the last stand of a soul refusing to surrender. One of the most enduring legends in this regard comes not from a shogun or a famed general, but from a lesser-known retainer named Kagehisa Arimura, a loyal servant of the Satsuma domain. During the late Edo period, as tensions simmered between reformist domains and the conservative shogunate, Arimura found himself cornered during a covert mission gone wrong. Surrounded by Tokugawa enforcers, he had no katana, only a fan tucked into the sash at his waist, a traditional tessen made of iron ribs and lacquered paper. Witnesses, if the tale is to be believed, say he didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly drew his fan, opened it with a snap, and stood his ground. The men around him laughed at first. What could a fan do against steel? But when they charged, he moved with the grace of a dancer and the discipline of a warrior. The fan struck with surprising force, aimed not at killing, but at disarming. He parried a sword, used the edge to jab at pressure points, and deflected a blow that would have ended his life. It was a hopeless fight, but for a few moments, he was more than just a man with a fan. He was a storm, a rebellion, a message. He didn't survive. But in that final stand, his story echoed far beyond that alley. His death became a parable about honor, about control, and about the power of spirit over steel. The idea of the fan as a last weapon, a tool of resistance, grace, and refusal to yield, was not born with Arimura. It had roots going far deeper, tied to the philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior. In the highest ideals of Bushido, a true samurai was not defined by what he held in his hand, but by what he held in his heart. If stripped of his sword, he must still act with courage, clarity, and precision. A fan, then, became more than a tool or signal. It was a metaphor for inner strength. Many samurai carried a tessen not just as a concealed weapon, but as a reminder of this philosophy. Some were iron-plated, crafted specifically for defense, when swords were forbidden in certain court settings or travel zones. These fans could break bones if wielded properly. But others were simpler, made from thick paper and lacquered bamboo as offensive weapons, yet still symbols of poise under pressure. There's another story, this one from the mid-1600s, of a court advisor named Shinnon Genji, who was caught in a betrayal plot against the daimyo he had served for over 20 years. Accused falsely and brought before the Lord in public judgment, he was ordered to kneel. His swords had already been taken. The daimyo, ashamed yet bound by politics, offered him the customary chance to clear his name through seppuku ritual suicide. But Genji refused. Instead, in front of hundreds, he unfolded his fan, held it steady in front of his face, and spoke. If my truth is no longer seen, then let this fan hide my shame. But I will not die for a lie. Silence fell. No one dared speak. Genji was arrested. But weeks later, when new evidence revealed the true traitor, his words, spoken behind a fan, were repeated across the court with reverence. He had risked not just dishonor, but life, armed only with conviction and a folding fan. These moments, small as they seem, seeded a cultural memory that fans were not just for performances or parades, they were for resolve, for protest, for control. When everything else was lost, the very structure of a folding fan is poetic in this context. It opens wide like courage, like presence, and folds away again with elegance, suggesting both action and restraint. Warriors who practiced tessenju, the martial art of fan fighting, trained themselves not only in physical skill but in psychological command. Holding a fan in your hand meant commanding attention. Wielding it correctly could throw off an opponent's rhythm, unsettle their expectations, and sometimes prevent violence altogether. Indeed, one of the most famous uses of a fan as a non-lethal tool of diplomacy was by Tokugawa Ieyasu himself. During a tense negotiation with rival lords after the Battle of Sekigahara, he reportedly brought only his war fan to the table, no swords. As tensions rose and tempers flared, he simply lifted the fan, cooled himself slowly, and said nothing. That silence, accompanied by the soft rustle of lacquer and wind, diffused the aggression more effectively than any threat. His fan, in that moment, became a shield not against swords, but against pride. It is this dual symbolism, the power to harm, and the power to hold back, that makes the fan such a potent emblem of the last stand. It is grace under fire. It is resistance without rage. It is motion with meaning. Even in modern Japanese pop culture, the trope endures. Anime, samurai dramas, and novels continue to depict lone warriors who reach for a fan when all other options are lost. Sometimes it's a nod to history. Other times a dramatic metaphor. A general who dies fanning himself on a battlefield becomes the symbol of dying on his own terms. A spy who passes a coded message hidden inside a fan before being captured becomes a symbol of loyalty beyond death. In everyday life, two echoes of these last stands can be seen. Elderly men and women carry fans not just as accessories, but as cultural inheritance. When they fan themselves on a summer train or open a paper fan before a performance, it's more than habit. It's history, unfolding quietly in their hands. And perhaps that's the most powerful image of all. Not a battlefield, not a duel, but a final, personal moment. A man or woman, old and forgotten, sitting alone, opening a fan, not to fight, not to defend, but simply to remember. The soft click of its ribs opening becomes the sound of everything they once were, everything they stood for. In the end, the fan's last stand is not always about violence or confrontation. Sometimes, it's about preserving dignity, holding form when everything else breaks down, remaining centered, composed, human in a world spinning out of control, because sometimes your sword is gone, your allies are silent, your name is dust. But if you still have your fan, and the will to open it, then you are not done. In the quiet hours of twilight, when battles are over and history books closed, there comes a time when even the mightiest empires rest. The story of the samurai is often told through the clash of steel, the roar of war cries, and the disciplined march of warriors into the fray. But in the softest corners of that legacy, away from the battlefield and the code of the sword, there exists a gentler fold, one made not of iron, but of silk and bamboo, not of blood, but of breath, a fold that, like sleep itself, brings closure to chaos. This is the story of how the samurai's fanso, often a symbol of strength, strategy, and survival, also became an emblem of peace, retirement, and the final bow. Not the fan that snapped open in battle, not the fan that signaled war formations, but the one that quietly shut at the end of a life, like eyes closing in sleep. In this last section of our journey, we lay the fan down not as a weapon, but as a pillow, a ritual, a final gesture of dignity. For the aging samurai, the act of stepping away from the way of the sword was not simple. Retirement was not just about age, it was a deeply spiritual process. After a life spent in loyal service or hardened combat, many warriors retreated to mountain shrines, temples, or small family homes to live out their remaining years. They left behind their armor, their ranks, and even their names, but many took one thing with them: a folding fan. the fan became a companion in solitude. It was used to cool their weathered skin under the summer sun, to stir incense smoke during evening prayers, and to write poems in the margins of memory. Some painted cherry blossoms on theirs, others adorned it with calligraphy, a single kanji character symbolizing the lesson of their life: silence, balance, endurance. In their final years, the fan was no longer a tool. It became a mirror. There is a poem from an unknown monk, believed to be a former samurai who became a wandering ascetic. It reads, "My sword now rests, my armor sleeps. Only wind visits me, and the fan folds gently in my palm, like breath before the dream." It's easy to think of a fan as fragile, ephemeral, but in these final years, its presence took on profound weight. For the warrior who once knew only structure and sacrifice, the fan represented something softer: acceptance, peace, the embrace of impermanence. One of the most touching practices among retired samurai was the art of fan letters to the gods. These were not letters in the modern sense, but small prayers or poems written on the ribs of a fan, then folded and left at temple altars. They were messages not of ambition, but of gratitude and farewell. A few surviving examples say things like, "I did not win every battle, but I remained true. Let the wind carry this name into forgetting. Thank you for letting me serve." The fan, in this case, became an offering, a final breath sent upward. In some provinces, fans were even placed into the hands of the deceased during funeral rites, especially for those who had served as warriors. This was not merely ceremonial, it was deeply symbolic. Just as the sword had been placed beside fallen samurai in earlier times, the fan now took its place in the hands of those who had chosen peace over battle. It represented not defeat, but closure, a folded life, a bow to the end. There are records from the Kamakura period of monks, folding fans in intricate ways and laying them over the faces of the dead like a gentle veil. It was believed that this shielded the soul from lingering attachment, allowing it to pass cleanly, like wind between bamboo. The motion of folding the fan mirrored the folding of the body into death, both a retreat and a return. Some daimyo, upon sensing their approaching end, wrote their own death haikus, a samurai tradition, and presented them alongside a fan to their family or retainers. One such haiku reads, "The mountain accepts me. I go not with blade or war, but with folded breeze." This gesture was profound. The fan they carried into death was not an object, it was a philosophy. It suggested that power lies not in resistance, but in surrender, not in fury, but in grace. Even the most famous warriors were not immune to this longing for peace. Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most legendary swordsmen in Japanese history, spent his final days in a cave known as meditating and writing Dakode, his 21 precepts on life. Though not recorded as carrying a fan specifically, many speculate that a ceremonial fan, gifted to him earlier in life by a daimyo, rested in the cave with him. It was engraved with the kanji for void, a central concept in Musashi philosophy. To him, void was not emptiness, but freedom. The fan, then, was his final echo. Outside of warrior life, the fan, as a bedtime object, became a universal comfort. In homes across Japan, especially during summer, parents would fan their children to sleep with soft rhythmic motions. The fan was a lullaby, a tender reassurance that all was well. Generations of children drifted into dreams beneath the soft gust of bamboo and paper, as their elders whispered stories of fox spirits, falling stars, and brave men who once carried swords. In this way, the fan remained what it always had been, a bridge between worlds, between heat and cool, between war and peace, between waking and sleep. It outlived the samurai and entered the homes of the common people not as a relic, but as a rhythm. And now, even in modern Japan, that rhythm continues. Though electric, fans and air conditioners hum in most homes, the folding fan still appears at festivals, in ceremonial dances, and beside the elderly who sit on tatami mats, watching the wind move trees. It is folded in reverence during no performances. It is given as a gift of respect. It is used in marriage ceremonies to bless the union with calmness and flow. And sometimes, on summer nights, a parent still fans a child to sleep not with power, but with love. This is how the fan survives, not in museums, but in movement. Not as something displayed, but something used. Something passed from hand to hand, gesture to gesture, generation to generation. And in its final roll, this gentle fold to sleep, it becomes not the end of a story, but its quiet continuation. So the next time you see a fan folded neatly and resting on a table, imagine all it once was: a signal, a weapon, a shield, a stage, a breath, a goodbye, and maybe, just maybe, a prayer that we too may one day fold gently into peace, into stillness, into sleep. As we close the folds of this story, one thing becomes clear: the samurai's fan was never just a fan. It was a reflection of Japan itself. Elegant, fierce, disciplined, poetic. It carried the wind of empires and the whisper of quiet monks. It stirred battlefields and soothed sleeping children. It signaled war and surrendered to peace. From the clang of steel to the stillness of twilight, the fan journeyed with the samurai through every chapter of life. In its open shape, it spread strategy. In its fold, it held secrets. In its motion, it danced with both death and dignity. And in its silence, it spoke louder than 1,000 swords. Even today, the spirit of the fan lives on, not just in museums or martial arts schools, but in the everyday gestures of life, in the respectful bow of a performer, in the careful gift passed between hands, in the soft breeze created by a parent trying to cool their child to sleep. Perhaps that's the final lesson, that sometimes the most powerful things in history aren't loud. They don't roar or strike. They fold, they sway, they breathe. So the next time you feel a breeze, let it remind you of this story, a legacy written not just in blood and battle, but in breath and bamboo, a legacy carried not just by warriors, but by the wind, and like the fan, gently closing after its final dance. We, too, end this journey grateful still, and deeply moved by the quiet power that once fluttered in a warrior's hand.